one of our finals here in Fort Wayne, and Justin is kicking it off with an Arcanine and a Palafin versus the Fluttermane and the Iron Bundle from Joe.
I like both leads. Again, like Arcanine into a Kingambit team can be a little bit risky. Fortunately for Justin, there is no boosting item or boosting move on the Kingambit on Joe's side. And with the safety goggles on that Arcanine, if you do lead the Kingambit, while you do get the Defiant boost, 85% of the time you are able to burn it and mitigate that damage output and not worry about the Terra Dark Kowtow Cleave coming through anyway.
It looks like Joe is prioritizing damage on both Pokemon on Justin's side of the field. A lot of players will immediately swap out their Palafin in this situation to ensure that it returns to the field in its heroic form with that lovely pose and that beautiful superhero status.
And the puffed out chest.
And the puffed out chest. Really, one of the more unique Pokemon that was introduced in this generation, and you can see why so many people love it. But they also love to swap it off the field, and Amoonguss loves to come in its place, as Amoonguss will be resisting some of the damage being thrown here, but will not be resisting a Freeze Dry, as that brings it down to just about half its health to activate the Citrus Berry. And now this Fluttermane will be targeting down the Arcanine, so there is no threat of a knockout this turn. Arcanine will be free to deal damage to either of these two Pokemon for Justin. And he chose a Flare Blitz into that Fluttermane, also a lot of damage in return.
Yeah, it's a big trade for both players. I think Joe comes out a little bit on top in that trade just because the Amoonguss no longer has its Citrus Berry. The Arcanine is going to get knocked out by really any attack it's going to face, and it's going to be very, very difficult to find a spot where you can Pollen Puff it at this point. So the Arcanine has to be very careful about when it opts to attack and when it opts to leave.
Amoonguss protecting itself from the combination onslaught that Joe's about to throw. First, an Icy Wind will connect with the Arcanine. I think the big question here is, will it do enough damage? It doesn't, but a second one will. This Fluttermane did target down the Amoonguss with a Shadow Ball, so no knockout on the Amoonguss this turn. Arcanine has one more opportunity to go for a Flare Blitz into the Fluttermane, and it does pick up that KO.
That's possibly a bit of a misjudgment from Joe there, maybe overestimating the amount of damage that Icy Wind could do. Maybe thinking that based on the prior Icy Winds from prior matches, both against Justin and against other Arcanines in general, that's enough for the knockout. You do end up knocking it out eventually because of the Flare Blitz recoil, but you do give up your Fluttermane in the process, so a bit of a trade there. I'm not sure it's one you wanted to make if you're Joe, but at the same time, this Kingambit is no longer being threatened by a Will-O-Wisp, and so that Arcanine being knocked out in any way possible means that this Kingambit is much, much safer on the field.
An opportunist, if you will, taking advantage of the situation now that the Arcanine has been KO'd. And I think more importantly as well on the field now to threaten maybe a double Freeze Dry plus a attack on that Kingambit to knock out the Amoonguss.
Right.
Do have to worry about the Palafin, but I don't think Palafin is taking out either of these Pokemon in one hit, especially knowing it's Assault Vest on the Kingambit.
Yeah, the Kingambit now threatens the Amoonguss, probably with a KO with the Terraflying Terra Blast. If the Amoonguss does Terrestrialize itself, obviously it wouldn't be knocked out, but you cover that with a Freeze Dry. At the same time, if you double into a Protecting Amoonguss and give Palafin the opportunity to go for a big Terra Water, or without Terra Water, a Wave Crash into something like Kingambit, that's a bit of a risky play there.
Here comes the first Terrestrialization, but it's the Palafin. So both trainers opting to Terrestrialize their Pokemon this turn. Palafin running that wonderful combination of the Terra Water, the Mystic Water. No Terrestrialization actually from Joe, opted not to use it here. Will be redirected into the Amoonguss, all these attacks, such as Freeze Dry, bringing Amoonguss down to just below half its health. Wave Crash from the Palafin will find its mark against the Kingambit, and it's enough for a KO!
Oh, that is so huge. I think that is the best possible thing that could have happened for Justin that turn. The Amoonguss able to stomach that Freeze Dry, would have redirected, I believe, an Assurance we saw come out from that Kingambit, which would have knocked it out. However, that huge Wave Crash is enough to take out that Kingambit in one hit. And based on how we've seen Joe play this team both today and this weekend and back in Charlotte, that's such a key component of this team that now is no longer available, and you lose a lot of options for damage into this Palafin. Still, we have the Freeze Dry option, and you have the Amoonguss, which can take an attack from the Palafin pretty comfortably, but losing that Kingambit for no damage coming out of it that turn is really big for Justin.
Justin swapping out the Amoonguss to get some health back thanks to Regenerator, sending in the Fluttermane in its place and activating the booster energy on the Fluttermane to boost its special attack. Iron Bundle will protect itself this turn, possibly trying to give this Amoonguss the opportunity to go for a Spore into the Palafin, but that's not going to be allowed either, as Palafin opts for its own Protect. but also Amogus did as well. So
how many of those have we seen fail this tournament, Gabby?
We've seen a lot, and what's really interesting mechanic-wise is that if you are the last Pokemon to use Protect in a turn and it does fail, that means you can go for a second Protect afterwards. So while Joe didn't opt for that this turn, something to keep in mind in the future, because it seems like these players just keep going for these plays.
Yeah, that Fluttermane coming in without getting put to sleep is huge for Justin now, because he has the option to fire off this very strong Jet Punch, and either something like a Shadow Ball or a Dazzling Gleam with that booster energy is enough to KO that Iron Bundle.
Iron Bundle was Joe's last defensive Pokemon in this matchup. While Amogus does have Pollen Puff, it's going to struggle to match the damage output of the Fluttermane and of this Palafin. I think that Joe, he played this matchup very well. I don't think the Terastallization on the King Gambit, that one turn where we were talking about it, necessarily would have made that much of a difference, as the Palafin still outsped with the Wave Crash. And going into Game 2, I don't think that's a situation that you can get yourself in again, because the King Gambit is so integral to your strategy.
Right.
You really need some speed support from the Talonflame or possibly an Icy Wind already down on the field at that point in order to ensure that you have that advantage and you can safely go for those big attacks.
You have to wonder if that's possibly something that Joe expected but thought he could survive, that big wave crash.
That's true.
King Gambit is a very bulky Pokemon, and it's possible that the way that Joe's trained it, he expects that attack to not KO most of the time, or based on possibly if they've played earlier and that exact same interaction happened, maybe a wave crash didn't knock out. But that specific turn, and I think the following turn too, the Fluttermane coming onto the field as the Iron Bundle protected and not getting put to sleep is so big, because again, the Protect on Iron Bundle failed that following turn, so the Jet Punch and the Dazzling Gleam was not able to KO, or was able to KO it, whereas you couldn't protect it to maybe put something to sleep and protect it that following turn.
Yeah, the other alternative is that the King Gambit can survive that without the Terastallization on Palafin, and Joe just anticipated no Terastallization there.
Yeah,
maybe thinking that he would save it for the Fluttermane in a future turn, or another Pokemon as well. So Justin Tang winning Game 1. Going into Game 2, Joe locking in his Pokemon very, very quickly. I think there probably won't be a Pokemon adjustment from him, but we'll have to see. Justin, once again, starting things off with the Palafin and the Fluttermane against the Iron Bundle and the Fluttermane from Joe.
I mean, again, I think the same lead from Justin that we saw in that first game. No, not the same. The same lead from Joe we saw in that first game. The Fluttermane mix-up here I like a lot. One, the Arcanine is threatened pretty heavily by a combination of Hydro Pump and Shadow Ball from both the Iron Bundle and the Fluttermane. And now you demand a little bit more attention from that Fluttermane slot, because it will be able to one-hit KO either of the Iron Bundle or the Fluttermane on Joe's side, barring any Terastallizations. So you have to worry about, one, the speed interactions between the Fluttermanes. I don't believe we've seen that on stream in this match yet. Again, could be something they know from a prior match yesterday in Swiss. But the Iron Bundle having Icy Wind makes that a little bit moot as well.
It makes it moot, but I think the other thing to highlight here is that we saw the booster energy boost to the Fluttermane's special attack, which means that it's not max speed, which I think is something very important for Joe to notice here. We also know that Joe's Fluttermane is the Choice Specs variant, so he could have maybe not invested as much in his special attack because of the Choice Specs and then gone for more in speed. But before we get to all of that, we're going to see two Terastallizations here. Both of them are the Fluttermanes, and both of them are in the Fairy type form. And I believe we saw Joe's Fluttermane Terastallize first. Palafin not swapping out this turn, going just for a Protect. Now this Iron Bundle going for Freeze Dry into the Palafin, will not be taking any damage, will not be lowering the speed of any Pokemon on the field. Dazzling Gleam from Joe's own Fluttermane connecting with Justin's Fluttermane. This is Terra and Choice Specs boosted, but it's not enough to pick up the knockout there, and a Moonblast from Fluttermane will be doing single target damage into Joe's own Fluttermane, but just barely falling short of the knockout, but getting a special attack drop.
Special attack drop is nice. Also, that is a really big Moonblast, because now that Fluttermane is certainly in Jet Punch range. And if you want to punish a possible Jet Punch into that slot, your options are to freeze dry the Palafin, which leaves your Iron Bundle open to taking a Moonblast of its own, which very likely KOs it. I don't even think I have to say very likely. That will KO the Iron Bundle. So a really great turn for Justin there. A lot of times players try to capitalize on Palafin, often switching out and targeting that slot, and Justin instead saying, I'm just going to leave it here, protect it, make sure no damage goes in the slot, and see what Joe opts to do instead.
The Amoonguss will be taking damage a lot better than the Fluttermane in that spot. Joe also giving himself the opportunity to swap it back in and change its move later on in the match. Fluttermane on Justin's side of the field will protect alongside of his own Amoonguss. And now this Iron Bundle going for a Hydro Pump into the protecting Fluttermane.
A really smart play. Like, there's no way an Icy Wind KOs Fluttermane from here, and I think Freeze Dry, probably not, but Hydro Pump probably does. I think a smart choice there from Joe to go for that Hydro Pump. But the Amoonguss coming in here means that the Fluttermane will certainly not be knocked out this turn. Again, an Icy Wind not nearly enough to KO, and there's no other way to bypass the redirection from that Amoonguss. Amoonguss on Joe's end also looks pretty nice here. There's probably no way that it doesn't get to fire off a Spore on this turn. But no, actually no Protect here. The Hydro Pump connects with the Fluttermane and knocks it out right away.
Yeah, no Protect, no redirection, just a KO. Fluttermane knocked out on Justin's side of the field, and we did see Joe actually double target that Fluttermane with a Spore, so will not put the opposing Amoonguss to sleep.
Oh no.
And the Pollen Puff also failing to connect with the Fluttermane on Justin's side of the field.
I think Justin trying to catch Joe going for that Amoonguss on that turn. If the Iron Bundle does go for a Freeze Dry into that Amoonguss slot, that Pollen Puff almost certainly goes off into the Fluttermane there, which would have been huge for Justin. That Fluttermane being healthy means that Joe has to dedicate a lot more resources to it. Again, Pollen Puff, if you are Joe, you just don't damage Fluttermane with that Pollen Puff. Probably you probably run out of PP before you knock it out. And so you have to use this Iron Bundle and whatever's in the back to damage it. And Justin trying to capitalize on that with a big Pollen Puff, unfortunately getting caught out instead and still not redirecting any Hydro Pumps.
No, and that's a one-hit knockout onto that Arcanine for Joe. The Amoonguss now the only Pokemon left standing on Justin's side of the field. Joe borrowing a note from Justin's book. Goes for the Pollen Puff, does not heal up his own Pokemon. Spore will be putting that Iron Bundle to sleep.
Again, I don't know if Justin's still trying to catch Freeze Dries, like kind of trying to catch Joe, not targeting the thing next to Amoonguss, possibly thinking that, again, Hydro Pump might not knock an Arcanine based on how they're trained or how they've interacted before, because I think a lot of times Arcanine has the ability to withstand a Hydro Pump from the Iron Bundle based on how they're trained. Unfortunately, Palafin and Amoonguss being the last two Pokemon for Justin means that the Amoonguss on Joseph's side is sitting very pretty. It's going to be very tough to knock it out, especially because there's no longer a Terrestrialization option for that Palafin.
I was going to say, at full health, I don't even think with the Terrestrialization, a Wave Crash would do enough damage to KO this Amoonguss. It really has to be a two-hit knockout, and it's going to be really hard to get 2 hits in if your Pokemon is asleep.
Yeah.
Justin will find the opportunity to deal a little bit of chip damage to that Amoonguss with a single Pollen Puff, but I think you're going to need at least 2 or 3 of those before Wave Crash would start to be something that Joe has to worry about. Iron Bundle does stay asleep to your benefit, so you have some time to throw a couple more attacks in. Here comes that Wave Crash into the Amoonguss. It's not very effective. I don't even think Terrestrialization would have been enough to threaten a KO, especially given that Citrus Berry is still in play. And knowing that this Palafin is about to go to sleep as well, Joe just has to hope that his own Iron Bundle will wake up soon. Justin could try to heal up his own Palafin after that Wave Crash recoil, but it's more important to continue stacking the damage onto this Amoonguss so that you don't just lose outright to Spore.
Yeah, I understand wanting to get that damage onto the Amoonguss. I think that's the thing that's going to be most difficult to KO if you're Justin at this point, especially given that your only options to damage it are Water-type moves and that Pollen Puff. Unfortunately, I just don't think that Justin has the amount of damage he'll need to break through the 4 remaining Pokemon for Joe, because again, the Fluttermane was able to survive that Moonblast on turn 1, and we still have the super effective Freeze Dry into both of these targets on Justin's side of the field. The Amoonguss cannot Pollen Puff itself, obviously, so any damage that hits into the Amoonguss will stick, and any Freeze Dries that they will take will not be very kindly met.
I was going to say, and especially knowing that the Palafin is still asleep at this point, this opens the door for your own Fluttermane to take the field as well. And also, there's still a final Pokemon on Joe's side of the field that hasn't taken any damage whatsoever.
Yeah.
So Joe is in a very comfortable position to clean this match up in just a couple more turns. I think the big question for me now is just how are these trainers going to approach Game 3, given how this game went. It does seem like it came down to Spore at the end of the day, as there are a lot of sleeping Pokemon on the field, but Fluttermane is not asleep, and Dazzling Gleam plus the Terra type plus the Choice Specs boost is enough to pick up the knockout onto the Palafin. Gets a critical hit on top of all of that, but I think Joe will be tying up this match, and we'll be going into a Game 3 in just a few moments' time.
Yeah, the second failed Pollen Puff from Justin there kind of sealing up the fate of this game. It's very interesting to see how that turn 1 went, because I think that turn 1 was actually very favorable for Justin.
Yeah.
It just kind of spiraled out of control from there. Those 2 turns where he didn't redirect an attack from that Iron Bundle allowed both the Fluttermane and the Arcanine to just get wiped out by Hydro Pumps. And so I think if you're Justin, I don't think that you mind how that first turn went. I think in fact it was actually pretty good. You got a lot of damage on that Fluttermane. You have the potential to knock out the Iron Bundle in the following turn, but you just have to be a little bit more careful with your damage dealers, because losing your Fluttermane that early was a pretty big detriment.
It was losing the Fluttermane and losing the Arcanine.
Right.
It just was like 1-2 after another, and while Hydro Pump isn't the most accurate move, I think that you can't put yourself in the situation where if Hydro Pump does connect with its intended target, that is just outright a knockout.
Right.
So going into this Game 3, I hope that we'll see a bit more redirection from Justin. Joe very quickly locked in his 4 Pokemon once again. I think he has whatever game strategy he wants to use already queued up in his head, ready to go, and I'm feeling a little nervous for him. I'm not gonna lie. When players lock in that quickly, I always wonder, like, is this just they've thought it through already? Is this nerves? I don't know.
I think from Joe's end, it's just confidence.
Yeah.
He's a very great player, and I know that he knows it. And so I think just if you have such a solid game plan, again, I think that turn 1 was certainly not game defining. And even if a Hydro Pump or Freeze Dry gets redirected on the second turn, like there's certainly no way to say that Justin won that game on turn 1. And so I think that, especially given that we did see a bit of a mix-up here that we're going to see when these leads get thrown out, I don't mind that at all. I think if you're Joe, like, you know exactly what you need to do to beat this team. Joe has so much experience with this archetype of team, given that he did just come off a second place finish with it about a week ago. And so I get it. If you know exactly what you want to do, you don't want to fake yourself out, give yourself too much time to overthink something, and just lock it in and start the game.
Start the game. This is Game 3 of the finals here in Fort Wayne, and what better way to start it off than a Fluttermane and an Amoonguss out on the field from Justin against the Fluttermane and King Gambit, the opportunist once again from Joe.
That's King Gambit pretty well poised here. Again, it's that Assault Vest set that doesn't take too much damage from opposing Fluttermane. And if you want to go for that Terastallization early on, you have the option to threaten super effective damage on this Amoonguss. A single Terra Blast often is not enough to KO it, but with the Choice Specs, Dazzling Gleam next to it, or possibly a Shadow Ball, anything like that, could put the Amoonguss in to range for a Terra Blast knockout. I believe on the first turn of the second game, we saw the Fluttermane's Terastallization first on Joe's side, and then it attacked first again following that. So probably safe to assume the Fluttermane on Joe's end is faster.
No Terastallization, Justin protecting his own Fluttermane and the Amoonguss, so taking a turn to see what Joe locked into. Shadow Ball targeting down the Amoonguss, and then King Gambit following it up with one of its favorite combinations, that Assurance. Joe not wanting to take any chances with Spore, with redirection at all in this final game.
And I get that. I think, again, that double protect in front of the Choice Specs Fluttermane is something that you just give yourself the option to know exactly what it's going to lock into. The way you play this next turn probably differs a lot if you know it locked into Shadow Ball versus Dazzling Gleam versus Moonblast or something like that. So I respect that play.
Rage Powder will redirect, but Justin's Fluttermane moves first with the Shadow Ball, and it's enough to pick up the KO. One Pokemon down. Joe's own King Gambit now going for the Assurance into the Amoonguss, but without the pre-existing attack and damage on that Amoonguss this turn. It just hardly does as much damage as you'd expect to see from it.
Yeah, and sure, Assurance is a great move when you get to combo it with something else, but when it's a solo attacking move, that 60 base power is often not enough. And losing that possible speed tie, Gabby, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was the Fluttermane that Terastallized first in that second game.
It was.
That might be info that neither player knew. It's very possible that possibly Justin knew, possibly Joe knew. It's tough to say, but that Shadow Ball going through from Justin's Fluttermane is so massive because, one, you spare the Amoonguss. The Amoonguss probably knocked out by the Shadow Ball plus the boosted Assurance, and two, you knock out that Fluttermane, which is such a big part of Joe's team.
You know, there's one other way to threaten some big damage down onto the Amoonguss, and now there's two ways, actually, with this Iron Bundle coming out here and using its own booster energy to boost its speed. But the main way that Joe could deal damage to the Amoonguss this turn is with that Terra-flying King Gambit, Garchomp's best friend, using those balloons on its hat to just float above the ground, but I think more importantly, use its incredible attack stat to target that Amoonguss with a super effective Terra Blast, which is exactly why Justin goes for the protect this turn.
Oh, this is just going to knock it out, isn't it?
Another Shadow Ball will target the Iron Bundle and bring it down to 1 HP. Just 1 HP, getting a special defense drop as well. Amoonguss protecting itself from the Terra Blast.
That is crucial. If Joe loses the Iron Bundle there, that is a very, very difficult spot to come back from. Certainly not unwinnable, because I think if you have two Pokemon that you're trying to win the game with, Amoonguss, King Gambit, it might be the two of them, especially on Joe's team. But the Iron Bundle sticking around now, that means you still have the freeze-dry option onto the possible Amoonguss on the side. That Flying Terra Blast is still a big damage option here, and you just have to worry about one more Pokemon. That's such a huge survival.
I love how Justin also swapped a Dazzling Gleam this turn to make sure that you can threaten damage onto both Pokemon. You do lose the Amoonguss to that Terra Blast from the King Gambit, but I think Amoonguss has put so much pressure on the board for you already in this game. You are okay with making that trade. You do still have to worry about this Iron Bundle, as thanks to the booster energy and the speed boost, it will be moving faster if we're not taking into account priority attacks. And Justin's Chien-Pao knows Sucker Punch.
Yes.
You can get into a situation where if both King Gambit and Chien-Pao target Sucker Punch, possibly at each other, possibly at other Pokemon, we'll see some interesting speed interactions here and whether or not that move would be successful. But if I were Justin, I would be prioritizing that priority damage so that you don't possibly lose Chien-Pao this turn to double damage.
The Chien-Pao is actually such a huge bring here now, because this King Gambit, being the flying type after the Terrestrialization, is no longer able to take those Ice Spinner moves very well, but a Sucker Punch coming out here in combination with this Hydro Pump is able to knock out the Fluttermane. That's a huge turn for Joe.
That is such a huge turn for Joe, as Fluttermane is KO'd there, and I think more importantly, the Pokemon count ticks down again for both of these
Arcanine.
trainers.
Okay.
With Arcanine taking the field, the Intimidate will activate the Defiant boost on this King Gambit, bringing it up to +1 attack. Will have access to the Extreme Speed, which could help with at least that Iron Bundle, but you still have to worry about just how much damage this King Gambit can put out at +1.
The issue is that if an Ice Spinner goes into that King Gambit slot, either the King Gambit or the Amoonguss in the back is going to be taking it, and that is not something you want if you're Joe, especially this Arcanine being the last Pokemon. The Extreme Speed will easily finish off the Iron Bundle. The only way to prevent the Iron Bundle from getting knocked out would be to swap it out. And then again, the King Gambit has to take the Ice Spinner attack if that's the case.
All right, Extreme Speed picking up the knockout on the Iron Bundle. Here comes the Ice Spinner. Will it KO?
Oh, it does!
It does!
Huge! That is huge for Justin. That means there's a Chien-Pao and an Arcanine facing down an Amoonguss. It's hard to see Joe coming back from that.
Chien-Pao using that incredible Sword of Ruin ability. I think one of these Treasures of Ruin Pokemon that had a significant target on its back going into this weekend, showcasing exactly why it is a Pokemon to watch out for.
Justin Tang!
Justin Tang winning his second regional championship here in Fort Wayne.
That is just so impressive. 2 regional championships, 3 attempts. That is a huge conversion rate. I don't think anyone else has ever done that, winning 2 regionals in their first 3 tries. Justin showing just how strong he is at this game, even as a quote-unquote new player. I'm sure he's been around for a while, but that is just insane performance from Justin. Taking out so many strong players too. We saw him take out Nick Navarre, we saw him take out Joe, we saw him take out Luca. Justin top 8, 3 players that are very, very accomplished, and I'm so impressed by Justin.
I am too. I mean, to be honest with you, it's hard not to be, because some of those reads that he was making in that Game 3 were absolutely incredible.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the Chien-Pao Pokemon adjustment was something that didn't even really cross my mind, as we hadn't seen that King Gambit rely on the Terra Flying, and I thought it might be too risky to bring, as it is a frailer Pokemon, even with that Focus Sash, but keeping it secret until the last possible second to go for that huge Ice Spinner into the King Gambit. Again, very well played by Justin, and very well played from Joe as well. I'm sure it stings a little bit more knowing that this is your second place finish in just as many weekends, but I guarantee you, Joe Ugarte is not going anywhere. He's still very high up on the day 2 race for the World Championships. You know, this is another title under his belt, and I guarantee you it's also going to make him that much more hungry for a finish at the European International Championships coming up.
Absolutely. He's defending a top 4 finish there, and I think it's very, very possible he goes for even further than that.
Yeah.
Joe, just like Justin, a very consistent player in these last couple months in this Scarlet and Violet era of VGC, and it's great to see that he's still performing so well. Again, just to come back with almost the same team, just a few Pokemon changes that fill the same roles in an entirely new rule set is very impressive. Like you said, it is tough to come second place twice in a row.
Yes.
Like, aside from the fact that you did get second at 2 huge tournaments, you got some good CP, you got some good money, got some good prizes, it does hurt a little bit to be that close twice in a row and just come that 1 game short. But like you said, I'm sure that Joe will come back even hungrier. I am completely confident he will win at least 1 more regional very soon.
At least.
Yeah, at least. Keyword at least. Just like Justin, I think, honestly, if we saw like a Justin Joe finals and like 4 or 5 more regionals going forward, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
You know, I kind of want to know what regionals these two are planning on going to, so I can make sure that I'm not competing at those regionals, just saying.
I'm cool being here, like behind this desk
no,
if they're playing,
great.
but...
No, the other thing I want to call out while we're waiting for Justin to get ready for the winner's interview is that I think both Joe and Justin ran similar teams to what they were running in Regulation B. You know, Justin did make the adjustment to one of the Treasures of Ruins and that Qian Pao, which definitely paid off, all things considered. But Joe as well, you know, swapping out the Mimikyu for the Flutter Mane and then bringing in that Talonflame as well this weekend. I think that really goes to show that you don't have to run a Treasures of Ruin Pokemon.
Yeah.
There are advantages, and I think that it is very wise to take advantage of those advantages to running one. But if you are somebody who has a tournament coming up in a couple weeks and you're like, oh no, how do I figure out how this fits into my team, or do I have to rebuild something? I don't think you have to.
I agree.
I think you do have to sit down and figure out, you know, with the new metagame, what are my matchups, you know, what do I need some help with, and maybe find 1 or 2 Pokemon to swap around.
Yeah.
But you don't have to necessarily scrap what you've been working with, unless you are running Trick Room and Armor Rouge, at which point I feel for you, man. I really do.
I think team building is so complex that trying to shoehorn something in just for the sake of it because, oh, everyone says it's good, so why am I not running it? A lot of times you run into the pitfalls of not knowing exactly what that Pokemon is supposed to do on that team. So if you have your team of 6 Pokemon, 6 is a decent number, and you're only bringing 4 to every game, obviously, but you have to make sure that every single Pokemon and even every move on your team has a specific role. And so if you don't really think that one of those Treasures of Ruin is the best option, you shouldn't use it. Like, there's no reason to just force it on there. I do like the Qian Pao call out though, because I think the Qian Pao in that 3rd game of finals was so big for Justin. He brought it out at the exact right time. You know, the Iron Bundle at 1 HP means that any Sucker Punch or Extreme Speed KOs it. You threaten to KO with a spinner into the King Gambit slot. It was just a very, very smart time to bring it, and a very smart decision to even lock it into that 3rd game at all. I think that was such a huge adjustment.
All right, well, let's hear from the man himself, Justin Tang, your 2nd-time regional champion. Sierra, please take it away.
Thanks, you two. I am here with now 2-time regional champion Justin Tang. 2 times out of 3. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's not something you hear often, and not something I expected to hear. So, yeah, I guess, you know, pretty cool. Well, more than pretty cool, but yeah, here we are. Yeah.
It is such a huge achievement for any player to be able to win 1 regional, let alone 2. So congratulations on that. That is phenomenal. And then
Thank you.
I want to touch a little bit on the match, because that was a really good match that we did get to see.
Yes.
And a lot of big calls coming out from both you and Joe. So then when you're in that moment making those calls, like, what's the decision making? We got to see in that 2nd game, for example, the lack of Rage Powder.
Yes. Because I thought the Mungus was the big, because obviously when you have a Mungus, it's pretty risky to Hydro there, because I can easily redirect, because I was doing that quite a bit, I believe, game 1. I mean, I know I did that game 3, but I'm not sure I redirect game 1, but that's kind of how a Mungus does. So I thought getting the Spore off would benefit me, but I got punished for it greatly. So he made a great read there. Very high risk, high reward, because it is Hydro Pump after all, but you know what? Like we said earlier, we went for a good game. Everyone was landing their moves. No, I don't think there was a single miss there. So, so you know what? Good on that. I wouldn't say hacks at all, anything like that. So, overall a great set. Yeah, that was kind of my reasoning. I definitely could have played around that a bit, but he got me good. That's really it.
I mean, you got him good to start off game 3, though, because
Yeah.
a lack of fairy terrestrialization. You got a big KO to start things off. So
Yes.
talk to me about, first off, making that call. Because when I talked to him, he's like, well, I thought Justin thought I was going to Terra, so then I didn't Terra, because that's where all the mind games
Yeah.
go. And then how that kind of set that momentum for that match.
I mean, it's also really funny considering I didn't even have the chance to tear it out that game. I kind of, especially like for that lead is exactly, Fluttermane was clearly the biggest damage threat if I could get rid of it early, because I knew Chen Pao in the back when it needs like a little bit of shift to kill it. Since I didn't bring Palafin this time, Palafin required too much setup, and I believe he would have a counterplay for it. So that was my adjustment, and my Fluttermane being also faster was also really huge. I was not aware about that because it's kind of tricky with Fluttermane, honestly. I don't know his exact sets, so yeah, there's that. So that was my call, and speaking of the no Terra stuff, like I completely tunnel vision when you sucker. Realistically, I should Terra Fairy there, but when you're in that kind of, you know, when you're up there, and sometimes under that stress. But realistically, that was my best play, and I mean, if you got the KO, you got the KO anyways. You want to change anything, but that was probably my safest bet anyways, realistically. Yeah, man, he played really well. He played really well, and yeah, I'm glad I was able to pull game 3 out, considering I'm here now. So, but yeah, it was a really fun set, honestly, and no complaints. Yeah, no bad luck, really. So,
No bad luck.
Yeah.
It's great when we get to see a set of Pokemon like that. And then
Yeah.
before, when it was Knoxville, there was that disbelief that you had won. And then now that you've won a second one, is any of it a little bit more real?
No, not really. Consider, especially like I said earlier, it's literally the first format. I came in, I really locked my team in 2 a.m. on Saturday. I was prepping a bit on Thursday and Friday, and I was like, wow, this is cool. And I was kind of doubting myself. I was like, but you know, I want to bring a fun team. I want to bring Dragapult. And I'm glad I got to show it off. Not in this match, of course, but you know, it did something at least, and that was kind of the whole goal. And on top of it, to just win it with it, I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty happy with just this team I came up with, which ended up being pretty solid. I'm really happy with that. So yeah.
And then something about your own life is not really many people in your life knew about you playing Pokemon before Knoxville.
Yes.
And then you opened up a bit more, like, because you kind of had to. You won. You were everywhere. Everyone was talking about it.
Yeah.
So then how has that Pokemon journey kind of changed now that you have been more open and being able to compete a bit more?
Well, everyone kind of just brings it up to me, and everyone has kind supporting words. Like my family back at home are watching, and my cousins. I haven't got to. My phone's blowing up right now, but I can guarantee it's literally everyone I know, everyone online has been supportive. The Tang gang, my friends, just everyone's just been really supportive. It's like, wow, you play Pokemon and you do well at it, and you can get stuff out of it, and that's something most people don't expect out of a video game, especially from my parents. And you know, it's really nice to have that support from just everyone now, and being able to not hide it. So it's really nice.
That's incredible. I know your phone's blowing up, and I want you to be able to get back to them, but I know you got a shout out before, but now that one was as a finalist, now that you're the regional champion again, is there any final words that you'd like to say?
Oh yeah, Yo Tom Tobe tell this. Shout out to him. Thank you for making me bring Chen Pao and for the beautiful Fluttermane set. And you know, Nick again for coming. And Dylan had to leave earlier. Oh, there's 2 Dylans, but both Dylans. Maverick, who came with us to Knoxville. And my family. Lewis for helping me prep. Same with Squirrely. And yeah, that's pretty much everyone, and just everyone in general. If I missed anyone, sorry. I'll get back to you later. But yeah, just shout out to everyone, really.
If you missed anyone, just win another regional and you'll be.
Ooh, I'll try.
Congratulations once again. Thank you so much for talking with me. For us, it's been a great event so far. We're going to be tossing to a short break, and after that, we'll be closing out the day.